Come on into the ditch. I'm your resident ditch witch, Tara Tyne, and we're about to get witchy, whether you like it or not. And today I am delighted to be joined by archaeologist, lecturer at Dundalk Institute of Technology, and member of the Council of the County Louth Archaeological and Historical Society, Conor Brady. Thank you so much for joining us, Conor.
Hey, Tara, thanks for having me.
And today we kind of want to talk to you about, I suppose, Inniskeen, but also specifically the rock art that's there, because that's a thing that you know a little bit about, is ancient rock art. And, you know, for most of us, this isn't a thing that we learn in school. So we're hoping that you can enlighten us a little bit. Just tell us a little bit more about it. Like, for example, the rock art there at Drumirrell in County Monaghan, the focus of this week's episode, it's described as Atlantic rock art. Can you describe to us what that is and the kinds of places that you would usually find it occurring?
Okay, certainly. Yeah. Well, rock art is found pretty much all over the world. But the rock art that's called Atlantic rock art, it is prehistoric, and it seems conventionally to date to the Bronze Age, maybe the early Bronze Age. Although there's research being done that seems to be pushing that back a bit in time as well. But it's found this particular type of rock art all along the Atlantic fringes, from northern Portugal, northern Spain. There's a bit of it in Brittany. There's a good bit of it through Britain. There's a number of concentrations in the north of England and up into Scotland as well, and of course here in Ireland also. It's not a continuous blanket of art. There's kind of pockets of it here and there, but it's concentrated on the Atlantic coast, and the sites that you have are quite similar to each other. They're more similar to each other than the rock art that we get in other parts of the world. Like, for example, up in Scandinavia, the kind of the symbols that we get in the Atlantic style of rock art, a lot of them are quite kind of abstract, and they're very simple. They're cup and ring marks. They're kind of penannular circles, radial lines, things like that. So they're very sort of graphic. They're very abstract. Whereas elsewhere you may have more depictive art. You'll see actual recognizable objects. You'll see stick figures of people. You see animals, you see hunting scenes, sometimes you see boats, for example. But we don't have that kind of art here. That's not what the Atlantic style is like, as far as I know. So there could well be a shared tradition. Broadly speaking, there's an element of culture that's shared along the Atlantic coast. And of course, during prehistory, there's a lot of other things that are shared along this coast as well. The tradition of building megalithic tombs, for example, tombs like Newgrange. And of course, there's a variety of other classes of tombs as well that are found all the way up and down, pretty much in the same area. So there could well be a connection between the tradition of building megalithic tombs and this rock art, although that is debated. There's no clear direct connection, but there is certainly an overlap, and it would be surprising if there wasn't some degree of connection at least.
So abstract motifs is really one of the defining characteristics, would you say, of Atlantic rock art?
Yes, I think so. Certainly in Ireland, and the Irish stuff is what I'm kind of most familiar with. And it is fairly abstract. You know, there's cup marks are a particular focus, and they are very, very simple, round depressions in a rock surface. These symbols, generally speaking, are carved into natural outcrops of rock. They're not unquarried boulders. They're not parts of big monuments. They occur in the natural landscape, if you like. And they're not, so it is difficult sometimes to discover them. They're not on anything that's clearly monumental. So many of these are discovered kind of by accident. But the symbols are very, very simple. As I said, the cup marks seem to be a focus. Many of these cup marks seem to be natural to start out with. And it's as if people living in the landscapes where these rock outcrops occur see these marks in the rock. Now, many of them can look, even though they're natural, they can look very, very regular, as if they were deliberately put there. So people, living in these landscapes, they would have known their own places like the back of their hands. They could well have observed these and wondered where they came from. And they may well have had folk beliefs associated with how they were created, how they were put there. The research suggests that they're not humanly created, but they embellish them. They actually use them as the focus or the starting point for whole panels sometimes of quite intricate abstract symbolism. As I said, you have circles surrounding them, concentric circles, circles with tails out of them, and various other very simple sort of geometric forms as well. But it seems like these are the trigger for it. They may well have thought gods, goddesses, spirits, or whatever who inhabited the landscape before put those marks on the rocks, and they're recognizing this, and they're wanting to take ownership and embellish and add them and incorporate them into their own belief systems.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting take on it, actually. Like I had come across, the mention of that a lot of the times they do start out natural, and that it's quite possible they were just being embellished upon. And I love the idea of that, of kind of working with what you've got. But does that sort of discount as well some of the theories about what this art may have meant in the wider context of the landscape it's sitting in? Can you talk to us about some of the theories about what people think the rock art might mean in other places that you've mentioned there with the Atlantic rock art, not necessarily just in Ireland, but people have been theorizing and speculating, haven't they?
I'm not entirely certain what the whole full range of theories is. But the rock art seems to be on kind of marginal land. By definition, they're kind of on rock outcrops, so they're not going to be on fantastically good agricultural land. So some people have suggested that they may have functioned as kind of territorial markers, that these symbols were placed on rocks along the edge of the land that a tribe or a group would have lived in and farmed in, just as a kind of a keep out sign, if you like. That is very, very simplistic. They may well have had that may have been part of the reason why they were put there, but I think there are probably deeper, more spiritual reasons for it as well. Other suggests that they may have marked routeways through the landscapes also. And that is possible. People may well have travelled along certain lines, but we don't have very clear evidence of any of the routes that would have existed during prehistoric times. There are myths and legends and traditions relating to routeways leading to the Hill of Tara, for example, but they are from much later times. This rock art you're talking about, 2500, 2300 BC, and we don't have clear evidence of routes going back that far. Now, so they may well have marked routeways. Some of them do seem to have a broadly kind of a linear pattern through the landscapes where they occur. So it's possible, can't be completely discounted. But as I said, I think there's something deeper going on. I think these were put on places that became special. Professor Richard Bradley wrote one of his books some years ago about the archaeology of natural places. In Ireland, we think about prehistory, we think about people making special places, we think about tombs and monuments all of the time, and big things that stick up. That's what we do in the 21st century. That's what we identify with. But an awful lot of archaeology happened in and around natural places, on hilltops, rock outcrops, places with nice views. And you don't necessarily get very intense construction work going on at them where you're left with something very, very visible in the landscape. And I think this is the rock art kind of marks some of the places that were special to these people for whatever reasons. It's possible that over generations, people came and went from these sites, and they may have added their own over time. I'm not sure to what extent that the actual sequence of the application of art has been examined on these sites. I know it's been done in relation to passage tombs. I know it's been done at the site at Naud, for example, where clearly it's been demonstrated that various different symbols are added clearly at different times. Some symbols clearly overlap earlier ones, and I think there's a strong possibility that is also the case with the rock art. Now, on the panels, when you look at them, a lot of the time, the symbols don't necessarily overlap each other. But when you look at concentric circles, you can imagine maybe a circle being added by each individual visiting the site over maybe a number of generations to mark an event, or to mark the passage of time or something like that. So there could well be. I like that idea. I think it fits well with what we do know about the art. Could be completely wrong, of course.
Yeah. Well, I actually wondered the exact same thing. I was like, is that a generational thing? Because there at Drumirrell, you've got the 7 concentric rings. And I thought, what a brag it would be, to be able to say that 7 generations of, even whether it was people from your own family, maybe you were, your father, you saw your father doing it and you came back to do it, or maybe it was wider community kind of thing. But, I think it's also lovely to think about the idea that it might have been marking the passage of time in some kind of way. And let me run this by you then. I came up with a theory from having studied the site in person and any of the research that was done about it there at Drumirrell. And I ran it by Paul Gosling as well, because I'm actually from Inniskeen myself. I reckon that that's a fording point. And I think
it's a fording point.
Yeah, because the river slows down quite close to it. Yeah,
Okay. That makes
slow
sense
and it's
again.
reasonable. And I've actually been threatening to get back into it with waders since I came up with that. I just haven't done it since, because I'm in Leitrim now, but I will get back eventually.
Yeah. No, that is a good idea, because fording points are important points in the landscape. They kind of focus people's routes, or their journeys through the landscape. They're kind of meeting places as well. So Drumirrell has been very well researched. It is part of a wider cluster of rock art heading into North Louth. I think there's over 30 sites altogether in this fairly tight kind of east-west cluster from the edge of Dundalk out as far as Inniskeen.
Slí I'm convinced the Slí Do you know what? Like, I know it's later and I know what you're saying about the stories, but the Carrick Robin, the whole way out there, out that road, there's rock art nearly the whole way, but I know there's no evidence for it. So I don't want to go jumping too far down the rabbit hole either.
I wouldn't rule it out at all. I think, you may well be onto something. It does fit the idea, certainly. And it could explain some of the motivation for the addition of the rock art there in that area. It certainly does have this kind of east-west sort of trend to it.
Yes.
So it could well be related to people moving through the landscape, but I think there's more to it as well. I think there's more to it. The people are quite motivated to put their mark on these places, possibly building them up over time. So certainly, I think that the routeway idea could well be important. There may well have been a ceremonial routeway linking all of these monuments. I know there's late Neolithic monuments that have been identified on the M1, the Western bypass of Dundalk.
Really exciting stuff over there.
Yeah. So there is a focus of kind of ceremonial ritual activity in that area. It's a very lived-in landscape at that time, back in prehistoric times, late Stone Age, early Bronze Age times, and there does seem to be quite a focus of activity. There is a passage tomb as well at Killen Hill, and there was passage tomb art associated with that. Now, some of it has since disappeared. That was recorded as far back as the 18th century by Thomas Wright in his book Louthiana. So there's a tradition, a strong tradition there, and people may well at particular times of year have processed through that landscape, visiting various sites, maybe adding art to it. There's burials in and around there as well. There's megalithic tombs, not quite down that far, but there are also early Bronze Age pit and cist burials. There's a number of of sites north of Dundalk in more or less the same landscape. So there is a lot going on, and people would, on a routine basis, I think on an occasional basis at least, have been traveling between these sites and remembering the people who've gone before, revisiting the special places in their landscape. So, it is all possible. We don't have the answers, and we have ideas, but we'll never get to the root of it, I think.
I know, and that's the both the compelling and frustrating thing about it, really, isn't it? And there was actually 2 Bronze Age urns found just a mile from Enniskeane village. Actually, the part where I used to live myself, it was like
Oh,
2
wow.
fields
Yes.
away, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that kind of really got me thinking about, habitation within the landscape, because I know we've got these beautiful things to go and look at, and it feels like they've been there forever, completely untouched. But actually, one of the other things that was found on the site there, because it is actually the only rock art site, I think still to date, is it, Conor, that has been excavated in
As far as I
Ireland?
know, yes, yeah. Blaise O'Connor,
Yeah,
who she studied and worked in UCD back before she died,
yeah.
back in the early 2000s. She, as part of her doctoral research, carried out an excavation on the site at Drumirril to kind of explore what else was going on in the immediate vicinity of some of these rock art panels. One of the big problems with the rock art is that it's exactly that. It's motifs that are carved into rock surfaces, and there's absolutely no scientific way of dating those. We assume that they are prehistoric because they're similar to other stuff from other parts of the world and other landscapes. And we also find them in landscapes where there are also a lot of other prehistoric monuments. Many of them tend to be early Bronze Age or Bronze Age in date. So elsewhere in the country, we've landscapes down in West Cork and in the peninsulas of Kerry, where you have rock art very, very close to a host of other sort of monuments from that period. So it's kind of on that basis that we assume that it's prehistoric. So Blaise anyway decided to take it a step further than just kind of observing what sites were close by. And she carried out geophysics in and around a number of the sites and identified a series of possible features. And then she followed up with an excavation. And she found a whole range of small scale features, pits and deposits and so on. Some of them dating back as far as the early Neolithic, almost as early as 4000 BC, close to some of these rock art sites. So there is the possibility that some of the rock art may well date back as far as the early Neolithic. Now, we can't say that for absolutely for certain. It may well be that this kind of ceremonial activity started in certain places, and the nature of the activity developed and changed over time. The rock art may be added later. It may have been there right from the beginning, but it underlines the fact that these places that were chosen for the rock art, they are special. And they're maintained as being special places over generations. People come back again and again and again. The memory is kept alive, and they actively engage with them, and they add to them generation after generation. So a very, very powerful tradition, if you like. And of course, at some stage, it's forgotten about. And it's again, people like yourself going back, you're reviving old ideas again, which is fantastic. We shouldn't forget about these things. And it's great fun trying to see into the minds of these people who lived so long ago. And they're not all that different to us. They're living in the same landscapes as we do now. So it
It's
shouldn't be too
interesting you
hard to.
say that, Conor, because I think one of the features that was suggested, I don't know that it was definitely what was there, but it was suggested that it looked with the geophysical survey like it could be a place for sort of enclosing cattle, which is, I think, a lovely echo of the fact that today the field is still used for the same thing. It really brings those prehistoric ancestors that bit closer to us, doesn't it?
Indeed, absolutely. I think that there certainly was an enclosure identified around the kind of one of the low knolls, one of the rock outcrops. We see them an awful lot. Some of them have very mundane, practical reasons for existence, that they are like animal enclosures. But this one, I think, kind of separated out one of the rock outcrops from the surrounding landscape. It's almost as if it was maybe keeping the animals out. Very often, special places are defined by the creation of enclosures around them. Again and again in the landscape, right the way through time, you see them being used. Again, the site itself, the enclosure is only one element there. There's a whole range of pits and post holes as well. So Lord knows what sort of features actually existed there at various times. And there's a lot going on at that site, certainly. But it is interesting that they did choose at that particular point to enclose the site. That there is a slight kind of monumentalization of that particular feature going on.
Yeah, I would definitely agree.
Hmm.
And why do you think that there is so little excavation of these sites in Ireland specifically?
Okay, well, the vast majority of excavation that takes place in Ireland is commercial. It's linked to the planning system. So most of the digs that happen are in advance of a housing estate being constructed, or a road being constructed, or an industrial estate, or some building or whatever being put up. So whatever you find on the site is what you find. Sometimes it's very interesting stuff. Sometimes it's very unusual. Some of the time it's more of recognizable sites that we have examples of from elsewhere as well. Um, Rock art, by its nature, tends to be in places that aren't under, they're not a focus for modern development. They're in kind of rural areas. They are often some distance from big towns, although there are some fairly close. Some of the sites in the Louth Monaghan group are relatively close to the edge of Dundalk. But up until now, they haven't really been under threat, so to speak. And again, from a research point of view, some digs are carried out purely for research purposes, purely to explore a monument type or explore a site and try to find out about it. And there's no threat of it being destroyed. And that's what Blaise O'Connor was doing. She was doing her doctoral research, and it was purely to answer research questions that she was engaged in that work. Um, she had the interest. She was specializing in that particular period. Um, Again, that's just the luck of the draw. Like, other people may have an interest in rock art, but not to the extent that they would go to the trouble of acquiring funding and getting landowner permission and assembling a team of specialists and so on. It's certainly something that really ought to be to be looked at. But the right person has to come along to take up the challenge and to put in the work and to choose the sites and to carry out the excavations. Blaise was that person, and unfortunately, she died before her time. And I'm sure, like, she would have made a career out of exploring these sites as part of her research work, but unfortunately, it didn't happen.
I know, and I feel that every time I sit down to read her papers on Drummurrell, because she was so passionate about it.
She was, yeah, she was.
And she really just was, I think, in the right place at the right time. And yeah, it would take a dedicated effort like that again to approach more sites. But at the same time, like, there's so much to be gained as well, isn't there? Really, like.
That's right. That's right. But we're in Ireland. We are far too lucky. Like, there's almost every field you go into, there is something, and it's very difficult at times to know where do you start. Um, you have
And where do
places
you
like the
stop?
Boyne Valley. Well, yeah, that too. Stop when you run out of money. Um, but there's places that, like the Boyne Valley, for example, and Newgrange, that over generations have been attracting archaeologists, and again and again and again they've been focusing on these wonderful sites. Absolutely, but places like that, and to the Hill of Tara, maybe to a certain extent, they take all of the attention, unfortunately. And there's lots and lots of smaller scale sites like the rock art sites that kind of slip through the net sometimes. And it does take every now and then a little bit of a reminder, I think, of how special these sites are. For people to take a note of them again, and maybe shine the spotlight on them, and carry out a little bit more research on them.
And speaking of slipping through the net, have you seen that lovely wee find up there at Lisnawilly and
Yes,
Castlemount?
yes, I did indeed. I did
That's
indeed.
tasty, isn't it?
Yes,
And
yeah.
only adding fuel to my theory as well about the Schliemel passing out that direction, you know.
Yes, yeah. No, I'm buying it. I am buying it, definitely. No,
Well,
I'm
I think
just
it's unusual in that, like you just said there, like a lot of rock art will occur outside of areas where there's likely to be a lot of development happening.
that's an exception, isn't it?
I can't believe we found it. Practically a town centre piece of rock art. Sure, it might as well be
Yeah,
on the square. It nearly
yeah.
was at one stage. Like,
And that land, no doubt, is going to be developed in the not too distant future as well. So, the town is growing, and unfortunately, sites like that are going to come under threat. So at least it's recorded now. We know it's there.
yeah,
So it will be protected. So, who knows in the future, if there is going to be a development there, they no doubt they will take it into account, and they will keep an area around it safe, I suppose, to keep the site safe. But there may be an opportunity to explore that wider landscape up around Lisnawilly, and maybe other similar features to what Blaise O'Connor found at Dramural might exist up there as well. So there's a chance that more will be discovered.
otherwise we might have to chain ourselves to a couple of bulldozers.
God forbid, God forbid. No, no, to be fair, the system now, I think, is an awful lot better than it was in days gone by. The archaeology has its rightful place. It has its rightful recognition in the planning system. It doesn't always work as smoothly as it ought to. But compared to 30, 40 years ago, if you think of the Wood Key episode, things are an awful lot better now than they were before. Um, so, and long may they continue like that. The amount of we know now, because of the commercial excavations, the road schemes up and down the length of the country, it's phenomenal. Like, it really has revolutionized our understanding of many different periods throughout Irish history and prehistory. We know an enormous amount more about the various different sites and monuments and than we did before. So massive investment went into the roads, and a small proportion of that went towards the archaeology, which was fantastic. And you probably know yourself, there's a great string of publications as come out. The National Roads Authority and now TII, Transport Infrastructure Ireland, have funded them. They funded very high detailed research, the excavation, and then the follow through post excavation work and publication as well. So the picture's always changing, and there's always the chance of new discoveries to be made. So hopefully with the rock art, maybe in another few years it'll be somebody else will have been carrying out more research, and there'll be more to be said about it, particularly up in our neck of the woods as well, up outside Dundalk, between Dundalk and Inniskeen.
So I think that's about it for today. Thank you so much, Conor. And before you go, you wanted to tell us a little bit about something as well.
Yes, sure. I'm as you know, I'm an archaeologist. I lecture in Dundalk IT on the BA honours in arts. So archaeology is one of the subjects we offer on that programme, along with history, politics and society, and English literature. But we've a new initiative just started up since January, whereby individual modules on larger programs, it's possible for people to come in from outside and sit in on those modules and study alongside the day students. And from September next, one of the modules that we'll be offering is Prehistoric Ireland to the Bronze Age, one of my modules. So if you happened to have some time on your hands and you were willing to sit in 1 day a week come into the college in Dundalk IT, you'd be able to sit in with the undergrad students and take part in the in that module. And I'll tell you all about the prehistory of Ireland, up as far as the end of the Bronze Age, around 600 or so BC.
That is fantastic, Conor. And I definitely say there's a few people watching who might take us up on that. And I'll tell you, when you add the online version and we can do it online, I'll be there in the blink of an eye. So I will, before you can spell
That'll be the
my
next
name.
step. That'll be the next step. But
Yeah,
check
well, you
the
let me
college
know now.
website
We'll
anyway.
keep in touch and I'll
Okay.
watch out for you putting that online now. And that is definitely something I'd be interested in. I managed to squeeze in 1 semester of archaeology at NUIG, Conor, before the bank bailouts that never happened made a pig's ear of that plan. So I've really only been back doing it as an amateur myself since. And I know that there's a lot of people who'll be watching this interview who are doing the exact same and probably doing a more diligent job than myself as well. So get on over and check that out. I'm sure the details are available on the DKIT website, Conor, are they?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you so much for that. And don't forget to hit that like button if you've made it this far. Thank you so much. And hit subscribe as well for more fun and witchy adventures. I upload, I suppose, when I upload, and you're not going to want to miss it. Slán agus beannacht, goodbye, and good luck to you.